workers at our ports and at our airports.
Senator Rice.
The bill that we're debating today, the Transport Security Amendment Serious Crime Bill 2019, is very similar to an earlier bill in a previous parliament. The Transport Security Amendment Serious or Organised Crime Bill 2016 in fact passed the Senate, and it returned to the House of Representatives with amendments for them to assent to, but it languished there for several years until it lapsed at the end of the previous parliament, because I think those opposite were basically, at that stage, too busy undermining each other to actually address some of the serious issues and the substance of these issues. I spoke several years ago to the earlier bill, and look, I'll just reiterate some of the points that we made there. That first up, and critically, preventing serious and organised crime in our ports and our airports is a critical issue that needs to be done well. It needs to be done well, it needs to be done appropriately, with a framework that protects workers and protects our security. And in particular, it's an important question and something that we need to do, to be expanding a framework that was but what we need to be asking is whether it's appropriate to expand a framework that was legislated to address terrorism risks, whether that's an appropriate way to be addressing the issues of serious and organised crime. We've got two major concerns with this legislation, and unless these concerns are addressed, we cannot support it. The first issue is what the impact of this bill will have upon workers both in the maritime industry and the aviation industry. As the Maritime Union of Australia, the MUA, have noted in their submission, the two cards are at core to this legislation, the Maritime and Aviation Security Identification cards, M6 and A6, are right-to-work cards. You can't work in our ports, you can't work in our airports unless you've got one of these cards. And the changes that are proposed in this bill have got the potential to impact up to 260,000 workers. So you've got to get it right. There are a lot of workers whose very livelihood and their very ability to work are going to be impacted by this legislation. And if the process goes wrong, it can be devastating. And as the MUA have noted, that in some cases the MSIC renewal process is taking months and is rendering some workers ineligible to access their workplace while agencies fumble the checking processes. So actually having a system that works, that is timely, that is effective, is so critical to both be protecting our security and critically also to be protecting the rights of workers to actually work. And in some cases you've got issues where workers may have an offence from decades ago that's been long dealt with, but it can cause delays every time a card is renewed. And let alone the processes that are being proposed in this bill, where it's got to be assessed as to whether they may, in the future, commit issues of serious and organised crime. Not whether they've got a history of doing that in the past, but whether they may in the future. And you can just imagine the processes and imagine how long this might take and imagine the impact on workers that that assessment may take. We've got to have a framework that is better managed and actually takes the needs for security seriously and takes the need for some certainty for workers into account as well. And the second major issue that we've got with this bill is here it's a focus to be aiming to improve security by tightening up the conditions as to which workers can get an MSIC or an ASIC, whereas at the same time we have got workers on foreign-owned vessels, on flags of convenience vessels, that are able to access the country without these checks and balances. And so I reckon it's really reasonable, before you tighten up the controls on our domestic workers and make it more difficult for people here to get work, that you actually have to be addressing some of the huge security holes in our framework as they apply to foreign seafarers. And so I think this is something that this legislation doesn't do. And if you just think about one of the issues that has been raised with us again is the poor storage of ammonium nitrate. and that there was a tragic blast in Lebanon last year, massive, huge blast that involved poor storage of ammonium nitrate. And one of the issues that the MUA has raised is that the government continues to issue temporary permits to ships that carry dangerous goods such as ammonium nitrate without checking if they adhere to the safety standards of Australia and without carrying out crew safety inspections. So it's really important that we ensure that we are applying frameworks fairly, systematically, and without engaging in basically its theatre of saying, yeah, we're improving security in one area while actually neglecting it in another. And I think this Senate has done quite a lot of work over the last few years looking at the issues associated with foreign flagged ships and flags of convenience ships in particular, and the risks that have been highlighted of flags of convenience shipping are very real, and they have not been addressed by this government, and they are not being addressed in this legislation. We had a Senate inquiry into flag of convenience shipping, and basically nothing has improved since that Senate inquiry. The International Transport Workers Federation basically said after that our report came out that we have got, under the legislative abuses of the government at the time, Australian seafarers, properly trained, security screened and resident taxpayers have been sacked and their jobs in a domestic transport sector given away to whoever comes over the horizon without a word of inquiry about their background. That basically there is so little transparency in flags of convenience shipping, there is so little controls on the background of those seafarers that we have got this huge gaping hole in our security that's not being addressed, that needs to be addressed. And our Senate report said that the committee maintains that flags of convenience vessels present serious security risks to the Australian coast, which need to be properly addressed. And all the while, this is happening in the context of lack of support for Australian shipping and an increasing proportion of the shipping that's being done by foreign-owned flags of convenience ships. And I think it's important to note, if you also think about the working conditions on these ships, and I'm sure many of us here, we've read the media reports, we know about the incredibly poor working conditions, the incredibly low wages that these foreign exploited seafarers are under, that the risk that therefore means that they are susceptible to pressure. They are susceptible to perhaps, doing things that aren't necessarily above board because of the pressures that they are under. They're not being paid properly. They've got, families that are really struggling in their home countries, and so it means that they are very vulnerable to being under the pressure of people to get them to perhaps do things that we don't want them to do, that are in fact a security risk to us here in Australia. So these are some of the really substantial issues that need to be seriously addressed by this government that just haven't been. In the 6.5 years I've been in the Senate and I've been the Greens transport spokesperson, issues relating to Australian shipping and the issues of foreign-owned and flags of convenience shipping, they have been something that we have been hammering away on for those whole 6.5 years, and yet nothing has been done. Nothing has changed. Those risks are all still there. So, in conclusion, we think it's really important that we are addressing issues of serious crime, but this current legislation is not dealing with the underlying issues, and we can't support it in its current form, given the problems with how it's been implemented. In fact, I said in conclusion, I just want to raise one further point, and that, in fact, is the lack of consultation with the workers and with the unions in the changes that are now being proposed. Last year, the ACTU said that the ACTU shares the concerns expressed by our affiliated unions that the changes proposed in this bill have been developed without the typical level of consultation with affected workers and their unions, consultation which has typically resulted in more effective and well-targeted security measures. So what we call upon the government to do is to actually go and talk to the unions, talk to the workers and listen to what they have to say, and actually propose some changes that are going to really work, both for the workers and for increasing the security of our country. We know we've got a series of Labor Party amendments which are being put forward today, and we believe that they do go some way to addressing our concerns. So I really call upon the government and the crossbench to seriously look at the ALP amendments and to support them, because with those amendments, if they are supported, we may end up with a bit of legislation that addresses some of these issues, at least as far as it goes for our domestic workers. So, I mean, we hope that we can arrive, through the scrutiny and the debate that's appropriate in this place, to some improved legislation that we can support, because this is an important issue and it really deserves serious, careful consideration, so that you end up with legislation that is both looking after the security of Australia and looking after the security and job security of Australian workers.